Okay, so it's wonderful to be with all of you, and it's crazy that uh, we're already here at Sukkot, and it'll be over before we know it. We really have to embrace, and that's really what Sukkot is about, trying to just be as present in that space to make space. If you haven't yet built a sukkah, or if you weren't planning on building a sukkah, might I suggest even thinking about making the smallest possible one, even just a little place that you can put a chair in and sit, and that would be enough. And if somebody does want to make a sukkah and they haven't done one, they want to do one in a couple hours tomorrow, then let me know. Maybe we can support that process, because I think it's really important to have that sukkah if possible. And I want to talk a little bit about the symbolism of what the sukkah represents. And I think that the message of Sukkot is in many ways more, for us at least in our lives, more relevant than ever. David says, what are we cooking? What are we having for dinner? Or for Yontif, I should say. So everybody else is doing the same, but you guys have the camera on, so it's great.
Ravnon.
Yeah.
Nothing you'll eat.
Nothing I'll eat, okay. But I'm sure my family would though. Anyway, so I want to discuss the symbolism of Sukkot, and like I said, I think it's more relevant than ever, this message behind the power of the Sukkah. And with that being said, these are ideas that, you very likely would have seen these Gemaras in the past, but we just remind ourselves of them right now as we approach Sukkot. So I'm going to share my screen with all of you. The starting place is, of course, in the Parshat Emor, the verses that discuss, which we'll be reading from on Shabbat and on Sunday, that discuss the mitzvah of Sukkot. The Sukkot Teshvu Shivat Yamin. For 7 days you shall live in these booths. Kol Ha'ezrach B'Yisrael Yeshu B'Sukkot. All citizens in Israel shall live in booths. L'man yedu dorotechem, so that future generations may know, Ki b'Sukkot hoshavti et b'nei Yisrael b'otziotam me'eretz Mitzrayim. For I made the Israelite people live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. Ani Hashem Elokechem. Right. So God put us in booths. Right. God put us in these booths, and so just like God put us in these booths, so too we build booths. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this is, does the Torah ever mention that we're supposed to sit, that when the Jewish people were in the desert, they actually sat in Sukkot?
No, they sat in tents.
They sat in tents, right? Nowhere does it say that they actually sat in these Sukkot. And in fact, a sukkah, I mean, not the ones that we build these days, but like a sukkah is like, it's not really a functional sort of thing. I mean, Yonah sat in the booth, if you remember in the sukkah, if you remember from last week. But they sat in tents, and everywhere, all over the Torah, it says that they sat in tents, as we will see in a moment. And so the fact that it doesn't actually mention that they sat in booths, this kind of opens things up already into a very, very well-known discussion, well-known conversation between between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. This is one of the more well-known machloket, well-known disagreements, arguments in the Torah, in the Gemara in relation to Sukkot. And the Gemara says, I'm not going to get into the background of it, but the Gemara says, Ki b'Sukkot hoshavti et b'nei Yisrael, ananei hakavod hayu, divrei Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer says that what were these Sukkot? They were ananei hakavod. They were clouds of glory. There were clouds of glory. Rabbi Akiva Omer. So Rabbi Eliezer says they were clouds of glory. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Sukkot mamash asu lahem, that they established for them actual Sukkot. And so we have this machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer says that they were clouds of glory. Rabbi Akiva says no, they were actual Sukkot. And forget the fact that it doesn't ever mention anywhere that they were sitting in Sukkot until now, but they were in Sukkot. Okay. I'll just mention that sorry, saying I've got low system. It's telling me to close some. I'm going to do that. I'm going to close some windows here because it's telling me that I'm taking up too much, which is strange. Just give me a moment here. Sorry. Okay. Can you hear me okay? It's saying that my audio quality is impacted. You can hear me fine? Okay, thank you. So again, we see this very famous argument between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva as to what were they? What were they? The Sfat Emet here, maybe we'll come back to the Sfat Emet says, what he says later on, but he says that actually they're both true. Right, and that's a very Hasidic way of looking at it. He says they were both Sukkot, and they were Ananei HaKavod. They were clouds of glory. But before we go to the Sfat Emet, I want to go on a little bit of a journey here. We'll skip some of these and we'll come back to them. The Mechilta, which is a collection of rabbinic sayings, the Mechilta comes along and says, what were they? And maybe this is a reference. What are these Sukkot? What are these clouds? They were the clouds that, again, it's the clouds that accompanied the Jewish people as they made their way through the desert. And then the Mechilta goes so far as to say there were 7 clouds, 4 of them to each side of the Israelites. One was above them and another below their feet. A further cloud would pass in front of them, leveling valleys and flattening the mountains. So there's this wonderful image of the Jewish people making their way through the desert and having this cloud, 7, right, all around them and protecting them. Okay? The Ibn Ezra doesn't really like that. He says, what do you mean there's 7? He says, some of the early scholars said that there were 7 clouds, but to my mind, there were only 2 and possibly a single cloud. Now, why does the Ibn Ezra say that? Because the Torah says, Hashem holech lifnem yomam be'amud anan lanchot hamaderech v'layla be'amud esh, right? And God went before them in a pillar of cloud by day to guide them along. So there was this one, right? Amud is amud anan, it's singular. There was one cloud going before them as they went through it. So when we're talking about these Sukkot, are we referring to, we're talking about this cloud, is that what we are referring to here? So let's just look what the Ibn Ezra explains. And this is what he goes off this verse. A pillar of cloud by day to guide them, to show them the route. It also protected them. And this is the meaning of the phrase, he spread a cloud as a screen. A pillar of fire by night to give them light. It might be that the pillar of fire was within the pillar of cloud at night. As it states, fire will be within it at night. They may travel by day and night. They traveled around the clock. These clouds, as if there were 2, remained with them until they crossed the Yam Suf. But in my opinion, then they ceased to accompany them, for there wasn't a need to travel at night after Paro and his army had drowned in the sea. Can anyone pick up what the Ibn Ezra is saying here? He's saying something which is actually kind of throws a spanner in the works here.
He's saying the Ananei HaKavod weren't nowhere in the Midbar, just
Yeah.
until across the Yam Suf.
Yeah, exactly. right? He says that the Ananei HaKavod stopped. So they didn't, what's the Ibn Ezra talking about? So first we saw the Mechilta that says that there were these 7 clouds going with them through the desert. And maybe we thought that could be a reference to the idea of that they had these clouds of glory, as opposed to these, maybe they had huts that they built for themselves. And there was some sort of metaphysical, miraculous cloud that was guiding them as they went through. But the Ibn Ezra, again, you can obviously disagree with the Ibn Ezra, but the Ibn Ezra says that the clouds only went so far as the Sea of Reeds. Once they crossed the Sea of Reeds into the desert journeys, they didn't need it anymore. They didn't need it anymore. And so therefore the Ibn Ezra, and we'll pause to take questions and comments in a moment. But the Ibn Ezra then says, so what did they have? So he says, actually, that near Mount Sinai was a forest of acacia trees. When they arrived there, and they were told that they would reside there for some time, and there was no protective cloud, as I already complained, each person constructed a hut, and they cut down the entire forest. So the Ibn Ezra is being really pragmatic. He says, okay, what happened is they didn't have the cloud. Once they left the Sea of Reeds, they didn't have the clouds anymore. They came to Mount Sinai, to Har Sinai, and there was acacia trees everywhere, which is interesting. If you're in the desert, there's acacia everywhere. So then they cut down the acacia and carried it with them. And therefore, what did they do? They made huts. They made actual booths. Actual booths. So according to the Ibn Ezra, there was no Ananei HaKavod. They didn't have those. And Ibn Ezra very clearly, who does he hold like? He holds like Rabbi Eliezer. He holds like Rabbi Akiva, who says that they were actual booths and not clouds. Any questions or comments up until now? Thoughts?
With the 7 clouds, one of them being a bulldozer, just flattening the countryside, getting valleys and mountains all flat. It sounds like that was able to make a freeway or a highway straight to the promised land. If that was true, if that was the case, it shouldn't have taken 40 years for them to get there. I mean, even going around in circles, they could have got there in a couple of weeks, couple of months flat.
Well, they could have until they made the mistake, right? They were supposed to. It was just a couple of days' journey from there, but it was because of the sin of the spies. Then they ended up going around, getting lost, and being guided to nowhere, in essence. But you're right. There's these great memes about showing how the Jews, could have made their way through the desert. Like it's not a very far journey, but if you're lost, it is. 40 years is a long time.
If they had a good GPS, they would have been all right.
Exactly.
But just this idea that everything gets flattened, it's like really you should go there and see the whole landscape flat, because for 40 years they were going like around and around flattening everything. If it's the 7 cloud with the bulldozer theory.
It's a wild image, right? It's a really great image. Yeah. Any other thoughts, questions? Okay. So let's take a look here once again at our sheets. Sorry, let me just share that with you. As we mentioned before, right, nowhere, we still have an issue with Ibn Ezra, right? Our issue with Ibn Ezra, we raised in the beginning. Ibn Ezra says they cut down these acacia trees and they built for themselves huts, Sukkot. The clouds of glory finished already once they passed, but they made Sukkot. The problem is, as we mentioned in the beginning, that I brought here 2 verses that discuss tents, and there's 8, 9 verses that talk about how they sat in tents. Nowhere does it say that they sat in Sukkot. Nowhere does it say that. So what I saw with Rabbi Alex Israel is a really great Torah scholar, and he says this is the obvious sort of thing, but that word sukkah, the word sukkah, is a strange sort of word, because yes, it is a hut, but if you look at the language of sukkah, does anyone know what it seems to mean or imply, a sukkah or schach? Right, because sukkah comes from schach. What is that? What does it imply? No? Well, let's look at some verses that discuss. Dove, you with us?
Yeah, I wanted to follow on what Andrew said. Lesochech is like almost to defend someone.
Yeah.
So it's like to protect, okay?
Exactly.
To cover someone, and by covering them, like to provide some sort of a layer of protection or defense. And, maybe, it's really, I think, it really matters what happened in the desert itself. One can perhaps think that, those Sukkot is actually God coming and, covering them up and defending them.
Yeah, good. I mean, you basically ruined my shiur, but that's good. It's fine. No, I don't care. It's okay. I don't care. If you look here in Tehillim, what does it say here? Hashem, right? Hashem. I'm not going to say it. Hashem Adoshem, Oz Yeshuati, Sakota leroshi biyom nashek. You have, right? Sakotas, you have protected, exactly as Dov said, right? And this is Tehillim. It's protection, but because of cover, right? It's literally to cover. And we see a similar thing. I brought that verse twice here, and fascinatingly, right? And this is a huge, huge connection here, is in the Kruvim, the cherubs, in the way that they related to each other. It says, and you shall make 2 Kruvim of gold, make them hammered, work at 2 ends of the cover. And you shall make right, 1 cherub at one end, 1 cherub at the other. V'hayu akruvim porsei chenafayim lemala sochechim b'chanfehem ala kaporet. And the kruvim shall have their wings spread out above. Sochechim, that's that word, that's schach. Sochechim is to shield the cover with their wings. And then they shall confront each other, and the faces of the Kruvim will turn towards the cover. So we see that word, sochech, schach, means to protect. But it's not merely some sort of physical protection, right? It's not simply just like you made a barrier. It's implying something else. It's implying something deeper. It's implying, of course, as Dov said quite rightly, right, that the sense of Hashem's protection. And so the Sukkot, what are they, right? What is the Sukkah? Is it a Sukkah, a hut? Is it an ohel, a tent? Is it a clouds of glory? What is it? Well, yes. Sorry, somebody wants to say something.
Sorry, it's me. A shelter? Would you not sort of say it's physically and spiritually? Yeah.
So, and that's the idea, right? It's like whatever it was, whether it was a tent, whether it was a hut, they were all these manifestations of the clouds of glory. Right? They were all a sense that Hashem was with them. Hashem was protecting them. Hashem was guiding them. Sochech, above them. Yeah, Paul, you wanted to share something?
Well, I mean, I think what you're saying is that it was all of these things. That there may have been a solid wooden structure, the walls, if you like. There may have been some covering, which might be a tent-like thing. You can build a booth and have tent over the top as a roof. But on top of that, there's the more religious and spiritual explanation that this is more than just a physical thing. It's got a covering. We're under the care of the Almighty. So it's in a sense, it's all of the above. It's not one or the other. That's one take that I look at it that way.
Exactly. This is a very Jewish answer, right? Like all of them, right? And it's also very obvious, this is a very well-known sort of idea. It's very possible you would have come across this idea. But my question for all of you now, and we've got a few more sources to look at. But my question for all of you is, what does this teach us now? What is this telling us? What is this teaching us in this current moment in our history, in these times of uncertainty, in these times of of illness, of challenge, of upheaval? What does this speak to you? What does this say to you? How is this guiding you, or how can this guide you? Take a moment to think a little bit about what this could mean for you and how you're going to spend the next 7 days.
Maybe it's meant to be a place of safety. A place of safety in uncertain times.
Yeah, and that's a hard thing, but it's like the very symbolism of the sukkah is life is uncertain. I think myself, seeing to I became very comfortable in a certain certainty of, okay, things go like this, and they go like this, and they do this, and they do that, right? And we kind of get into these habits and patterns, and then that all changed, right? That all kind of like what we do and how we do and what the future looks like. And, I imagine things might settle down at some point, and we'll try to find some new sort of certainty that we can rely upon. But the point here is that it's always uncertain. Mm-hmm. It's always, like we just, sometimes deceive ourselves to say, okay, this is what they are. No, there's always a sense of uncertainty. And the point is to find the faith amidst the uncertainty. That's always there, right? And so we specifically leave our home, the place of certainty, the place of comfort, the place of I know it and it's mine, and I can relate to it, and I go outside and I go into a little rickety hut where I'm exposed to the elements to an extent, though protected somewhat, and I'm being asked internally to try to tap into a different way of experiencing reality. And this is always here, right? This has always been the message, because again, for us, for many of us, I can't speak for all of you, but for many of us in our experiences, in our lifetimes, like things have been pretty, considering what Jews had to go through in quite recent history, right? Like our lives have been pretty good, and they still are. They still are. But there's always been uncertainty in the past, and Jews have always been forced with this choice to sit, and be in the sukkah and say, Hashem, I don't necessarily see it or understand it, but I have faith in you. The sukkah is called the tzila de mehemnuta in Aramaic. It's called the shade of faith, that there's something about the sukkah that teaches us to have faith even in a fragile world. Anybody have anything that speaks to them or that they want to share with us?
At the end of the day,
We seem to have lost him. Oh, they lost me.
you're frozen on the
Can you guys hear me? Hello?
You lost everyone again. Why would you do it,
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello?
And you're moving. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Can you hear me?
You're all frozen. I think I'm frozen too.
Well, you're unfrozen now.
Oh, but you're not.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right.
We're not frozen for each other.
Okay, good. This is it's telling me that my internet is unstable. I got a whole bunch of people using a whole bunch of devices at this moment. Oh, it's like, speaking of which, now
It's demonstrating uncertainty for you.
well, that's the point I was trying to make, Karen. You beat me to it, right? It's uncertain, you know, like we're at the whim of the NBN. Someone was saying something before we got cut out there. Do I still have you?
Yes.
We come back to our own homes.
Yeah, I said, if we're out in the sukkah, we can come back to our own homes. If it's raining, we've got that sort of certainty. But there are people out there in the world who are homeless and don't have that certainty. We should be thinking of them too.
It's a powerful sort of thought, you know, like the halacha talks about, you know, all these things, like if you're eating soup and then the soup starts to get ruined by the little drops of rain, you can go inside. You know, so it's like, yes, be uncertain, but we're Jews in the end of the day. Like, so we still have to go back inside.
Be reasonable.
Be reasonable. Come on. But to have that sensitivity, right? To that sensitivity of what people have to deal with and the experiences that people have. And that's actually a beautiful segue to just this next point that I want to share with you. Sukkot is known as, like there's all of, so Rosh Hashanah is Yom HaZikaron. And it has the Zman, Pesach is Zman Cherutenu. And Shavuot is Zman Matan Toratenu. That's the time of the receiving of Torah. What is Sukkot? Do you remember?
Something in spring?
No. It's only spring in Australia too.
V'samachtem?
Yeah, Zman Simchatenu, right? It's the time of our joy. And that'll continue all throughout the week, right? And even into Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah, right? The time of our joy. Sukkot is above all characterized by its joy. Just one second here. Sorry. So it is a time of joy. That's what it's characterized as, which is strange. It's a strange sort of thing. You know, this is joy. And I want to look at a Gemara with you in just a moment. But on the point that you made, Paul, the Rambam specifically talks about the simcha of Yom Tov, the joy of a festival. And he says that what is the truest joy of a festival? It's not just sitting in your own home and being, like enjoying, great wine and great, great food and, oh, look at this. I'm so happy. This is incredible. That's a part of it. And those things are beautiful. But the Rambam says true joy is sharing what you have with people who don't.
No way. You're not barking.
Sorry. It's sharing what you have with people who don't have. Yep, who's he barking at? All right, so turn off the light there. Sorry, the dog is getting angry at a possum in the backyard. So the Rambam says that is what simcha is. That is true joy. That is true joy. And so I think now, obviously we have an issue this year, Paul, in that we can't invite people into our homes at all. But we can have that thought in mind, and then we can follow that up with action in terms of supporting other people and donating to causes and thinking about, thankfully here in Australia, we're moving into warmer months, which is easier for people who are exposed to the elements, but they live all year long. I mean, exposed to really, really difficult things. I think it's a beautiful idea to kind of bring that up into our consciousness and to maybe do something with that as well.
But there is one joyful aspect of Sukkot, because it's the first time since the pandemic came where we can actually do something in our homes, reflecting what we normally do.
Yeah.
Whereas that's something we have not been able to do since even before Pesach. So
Yeah.
that makes this Sukkot actually rather special.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, it's so, like we can fully, to an extent, I mean, obviously you can't really go to shul, but the mitzvah of Sukkah, people do in their own homes, right? And that's, and again, I do want to encourage everyone to make a sukkah if they can. And if you can't, it's understood, but you should certainly try to go out of your way to make that, to fulfill that mitzvah. And, and yes, that's an added level of joy. I just want to share with you one more source here. Famous Gemara on Kohelet. Of course, hopefully we're going to have the opportunity on Sukkot to read the book of Kohelet. And the book of Kohelet is wild, and it's really kind of a strange book. And look what the Gemara says about it. Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Rav Shmuel bar Shilatz, in the name of Rav, the sages sought to suppress the book of Kohelet and declare it apocryphal because its statements contradict each other. So the rabbis didn't want Kohelet to be canonized because it contradicts each other. And why did they not suppress it? Because its beginning consists of matters of Torah and its end consists of matters of Torah. Now, it also could be, and this is, I think I spoke about this last year on Sukkot, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if it was last year, but on Sukkot, but I definitely spoke about last year at some point about Shlomo HaMelech, about King Shlomo and our complicated relationship with Shlomo, who, on one hand, he built the Beit HaMikdash, on the other hand, didn't really fulfill what he was supposed to do. So the Gemara elaborates. What does this mean? And so it could be that Kohelet as well, the rabbis have a weird connotation, that the book has a strange connotation because Shlomo is said to have written it. So the Gemara elaborates. Its beginning consists of matters of Torah, as it is written, what profit is man of all his labor which he labors under the sun? And its ending consists of Torah, as it is written, the end of the matter, all having been heard, fear God and keep his mitzvot, for this is the whole man. So we see this idea that in the beginning, there's these messages that the Torah or the rabbis found were okay, that they're consistent with the sorts of messages that they want to communicate. And the end as well. Sof davar, what's the beautiful pasuk? Let's just read the Hebrew. Sof davar hakol nishmat Elohim yirah b'mitzotav shemor hizeh kol ha'adam. Right, at the end, just keep the Torah. And in Kohelet, one of the contradictions that it has, of course, it says, be joyous because, life is short. And it also says, all joy is nonsense and don't do it. And people spend their whole lives chasing after happiness and they're not happy. And I think that's something that's really poignant for us, especially today, in the world that we live in today. I mean, we have so much affluence, we have so much, but people are more upset and more depressed and more, anxious. And I mean, even before the whole pandemic, I mean, we were dealing with a profound, mental health crisis. And now it's only exacerbated what already what already was there. But we live in a time of plenty, but that plenty and that pursuit of joy and all that kind of that constant experiences that appeal to certain elements of what we want, they don't make us happy. And so Kohelet tunes into that. But he also says that there is some sort of joy that is meaningful. And of course, what the rabbis famously say, what is a joy that is worth pursuing? It's what we would call simcha shel mitzvah, the joy of performing a mitzvah. that's not just a frum answer, right? People hear, oh, it's like frummy sort of answer. There's something deep to that. If your intention is, I want to do what I'm here to do, I want to live a life of meaning and purpose, that brings with it joy. If I'm living a life of purpose and I'm engaged in something that is inherently meaningful, that will be joyous. If I'm seeking out the joy for its own sake, I'll get it temporarily, and then it'll be gone, and then I'll need something else to give me that same sort of satisfaction. And we see it, and we get pulled into it, right? None of us, maybe some of you are, but we're not really immune to it, and it's a struggle. But we need to be conscious of that. So Sukkot says, you know, it's real joy. Okay, leave your comfortable home behind, and take your nice dishes outside if you can't, if you're comfortable. But like, it's not about that. It's not about all the trappings of the comfortable life. It's about a basic thing of being covered, being protected, being surrounded by the presence of God. Hopefully, in normal times, being able to be with friends and family, and just being immersed in a life of meaning and purpose and a connection to God. And that itself is inherently joyous and inherently beautiful. And I think that is possible, and not just possible, it is needed for us today. It is still possible for us to be really, really happy, even if there are people who are struggling out there in the world, and even if there's difficult situations. This is not like I'm happy because, oh, my life is so great. No, it's not. There's great suffering, but it's okay. There's still clearly a purpose here. Life is still joy. Life is still a gift. And we need to seek out opportunities to experience that as much as we possibly can. And then we tap into it. What do you guys think about that? I've been talking for a long time. Thoughts, feelings, concerns?
I've got a few thoughts and a question, if that's okay.
Sure.
Firstly, do you realise with your dog and the possums, you're going to be out amongst it next week in your car?
He's very brave with the glass in front of him, but we'll see what happens when he's on the other side.
Yeah. I wanted to respond to what Paul said. I was thinking about what you were saying about homeless people. I think it's sometimes a disruption to our normal everyday lives and the working of society that actually can make a difference in things. I've got a friend who works with the homeless, and she told me how they were quickly found accommodation at the start of the first lockdown, because we were all being told, go home, stay home, you'll be safe there, don't mix with others, and they had no homes to go to. And her challenge working in that sector and that of her colleagues was when the arrangements for where those people were going to stay finished after a certain number of weeks or months, nobody wanted to put those people back on the streets. And I know the sector is working so hard to find accommodation that's going to work for those people, not just in rooming houses, which apparently doesn't work, but something longer term and ongoing. And I just heard the other day some more funding, I'm not sure at which level, has been put towards that. So I'm hoping that the government and society and the relevant people working in the sector actually make a real leap forward in this section, in this area, so we don't have so many thousand people on the streets. My other thought was, and you touched upon it, because when we looked at detail of the seraphim, I think it was, on top of the tabernacle, that when you look at the tabernacle, when you look at what's written about the tabernacle, I know that there's precise details of every single aspect of it. It's really, is that correct? It's spelt out. Yeah, very much so. And if you think about that, it's like, that's only going to be rebuilt once again, hopefully in our lifetime, and then be there, stay there. They're going to use that once, but they seem to be so vague on Sukkot that we make every year, and we're not even sure if they're tents or huts or what's the story. Is there anywhere where it specifies it's got to have at least 2.5 or 3 walls, and the holes above only have to be this much, and you can put tzchach or bamboo or whatever? Or is that all rabbinic interpretation and decisions and so on?
Yes, and I mean, the point that you made is correct in that the Torah, not only does the Torah not tell you how to build the sukkah, it's not even so clear that they were in the Sukkot, right? Obviously, again, we read that God put them in Sukkot, and then we have to understand, well, what does that mean if they didn't see, like, doesn't mention that earlier? And so we see that Sukkot represents some sort of dwelling, domicile that has an added element of divine protection to it. But it's the rabbis, it's in the Gemara where the rabbis come to understand, the mission of the Gemara, they come to understand just what are the specifications of that actual sukkah. But it doesn't mention that in the Torah anywhere.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure. Okay, so just to re-look at what we first off spoke about how, as I mentioned just a moment ago, the Torah doesn't actually talk about Sukkot, going through the Sukkot. We looked at they lived in tents. We looked at this idea of this this cloud that went before them, but the Ibn Ezra said the cloud actually ended and they built actual physical Sukkot. And then we came to understand that a Sukkah is more symbolic of God's divine protection. And it's this divine protection that is afforded to us as well in a fragile world. And this, I think, is the main takeaway for all of us, which is to have a sense of, and to sit and meditate on this idea of what this means to you, and to try to really internalize that Hashem is guiding me in my life, and Hashem is guiding us collectively and also globally. It feels hard, it feels like we're kind of certain places and certain countries in particular spinning out of control, but okay, there's still something making all, it's all like just the very fabric of life is being brought into being. And I think that we need this message more than ever. The sensitivity that Paul was talking about earlier, we need all of that more than ever, understanding what true joy is, and to commit ourselves to living with as much purpose as possible. And that when we live with purpose, the Torah tells us, Kohelet tells us, when we live with purpose, that itself imbues within us a deep joy, which is the joy of Sukkot. The joy of Sukkot is not some sort of frivolous, pleasure-seeking joy. It's a joy of connection. It's a joy of connection to people and to connection to Hashem. And so that's really what I wanted to share with all of you tonight. A simple, straightforward idea, but I think a beautiful and a powerful one, and a relevant one for our lives right now. So I wish you all a Chag Sameach, a Chag of true joy. And if I can support if you have any questions, then please let me know, and I'm happy to continue to support the building of the Sukkot or whatever it is you need. But with that, I wish you all a Chag Sameach, and I hope to be able to see you all in person very, very soon, please God. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. Chag Sameach, Rabbi.
Chag Sameach.
Thank you. Chag Sameach, everyone.
Take care.